This may sound obvious, but the point of stories comes at the end. And sometimes we read a story, see a story in a movie, and we're sitting there for 3 hours, and stuff happens, but there doesn't seem to be any point. It all just kind of falls flat. What was that? Or maybe someone's even telling us a story, and we're like, okay, what's the point of that? If you're bold enough, if you know them well enough, maybe you even ask. So the point of a story comes at the end. And we see that throughout the Bible as well. Job, for example, who we heard from a couple of weeks ago, the point of the story wasn't at the beginning where all this stuff happens to him, or even in the middle where he and his friends are just kind of hashing out, what all this, means. The point of the story of Job comes at the end, where the problem of suffering isn't for Job to answer or his friends, but for God to respond to. The passage about Abraham and his sacrifice of his only son, Isaac, the point isn't even that he was asked to offer up his son as a test of his faith and trust in God and his promises and his willingness to do that. As amazing as all that was and as important as all those pieces were, the point of that story of Abraham and Isaac ultimately comes at the end where God provides a replacement for Isaac. Of course, foreshadowing Jesus having a replacement for us so that we can escape death. In the book of Revelation, the very last book of the Bible, the point of that whole episode, that whole story, that whole book is not, all those wild visions throughout the whole middle, as significant, as symbolic as they are. The point of the story of Revelation comes at the very end, when God finally brings his kingdom fully to bear. He makes a new heaven and a new earth, and the new and eternal Jerusalem comes down for his people to live in forever, and the mystical, eternal marriage of God and his people that we were made for comes to fulfillment. Even in the story of Jesus, since the whole point of the story, if you want to call it that, comes at the end. Here we see the beginning of his ministry when he announces the kingdom is at hand. It's a time of fulfillment. This is after he was baptized and, of course, tempted in the desert for 40 days. And, of course, Christmas is still in our minds, perhaps, the beginning of Jesus' earthly life. But even his teachings and his miracles and the signs and the wonders, of course, even ultimately his dying on the cross isn't the final point. The point of Jesus' life ultimately is his rising from it and his ascending into heaven so that we can rise and also know the fullness of life. And so to the story of Noah and the ark, the point comes at the end. Ultimately, as important as it is, the ark, the animals, the olive branch, the point of the story of Noah and the ark comes at the end, as we hear today, when God declares a covenant with Noah and for all of his descendants, which is to say, all the people. A covenant which is not some kind of contract or legal agreement. It's a complete, 100%, all-in, intimate relationship among people. And God, for his part of this all-in covenant, declares that there will be no more sort of complete wiping out of life. No complete universal catastrophe like the flood, where everything except those on the ark just sort of got wiped out. As part of this covenant, too, is promise of a new and restored creation afterwards. Of course, our story is caught up in all of this as well. And the point of the story of our life, too, comes at the end. And by the end, I don't mean our earthly death. I mean the end for which we were made, to live eternally with the Lord forever in heaven. Perhaps like with Noah at the time of the flood, it was thought that everything was just sort of completely wiped out. Maybe that's what the end of our earthly life we're tempted to think of as well. There's no coming back from it. Everything's just completely wiped out. But just as we know there's life after the flood, we also have this pledge of life after death. It comes to us first through our baptism, when we spiritually died and rose with Christ and become a new creation and have the indwelling of the very Holy Trinity and are marked out as a beloved son or daughter of God, a stamp that's put on our soul that never goes away. Here in our journey of Lent, I think we're reminded of both the beginning of our life, which is to say our baptism, and then ultimately the point of our life, that eternal life of heaven. And in the midst of it, there's ups and downs, there's challenges, there's struggles, there's blessings, there's temptations, and we see that again with Jesus in the gospel. For 40 days he had to wrestle with temptation and wild beasts, but also that the angels came and ministered to him. So we know in the wilderness of our life, so to speak, which is, of course, much more than 40 days, however long it is, we have to deal with the ups and downs of just life, but knowing that the Lord is with us through it all. Because we know he's with us in a special way through the gift of himself in the Eucharist that continues to nourish us, sustain us, but also continue to renew us and re-enliven us. So as we encounter Christ here in the Mass today and each time, let us enter into a renewal of the covenant that the God of all has made with you and me, and allow the grace of God continue to make us into the new creation that we are.